This is Tanzania in November 2025. The country's first female president has turned the nation upside down. She just won an election with 97.66% of the vote without a real opposition.
Samia Suluhu Hassan, naapa kwamba nitakuwa mwaminifu kwa Jamhuri ya Muungano wa Tanzania.
Opposition leaders faced treason charges simply for demanding electoral reforms, and she just called it fair and free. The internet went dark nationwide. The military was deployed to the streets. Reports emerged that hundreds were killed in post-election protests. The government denies it, while being caught secretly dumping bodies. This was a country built on unity, a nation that sheltered refugees from neighboring wars, a place where Julius Nyerere transformed a colonial territory into an independent nation in 1961. 64 years later, we have to ask, how did Tanzania go from being Africa's model of peaceful transition to this? By the end of this video, you will understand Tanzania's full history, how each president gradually destroyed what Julius Nyerere built, and how the first female president delivered the final blow. Before Europeans arrived, Tanzania's coast was thriving. The Swahili coast connected Africa to Arabia, Persia, and China through trade in gold, ivory, and spices. Then came conquest. The Portuguese arrived in 1498. They attacked Kilwa in 1505, conquered Zanzibar. For 200 years, Portugal extracted taxes and controlled trade through force. By the late 1600s, the Omanis expelled the Portuguese and made Zanzibar their capital. Under Omani rule, the East African slave trade exploded. Thousands were captured from Tanzania's interior, marched to the coast in chains, and sold in Zanzibar's markets. Then came 1884, the Berlin Conference. European powers met in suits, sitting around tables in Germany, carving up Africa with pencils and rulers to divide Africa among themselves. Not a single African was present. Germany took Tanganyika, Britain controlled Zanzibar. Borders drawn on paper became borders enforced with guns. Tanzanians resisted. The biggest uprising came in 1905, the Maji Maji Rebellion, led by Kinjekitile Nwale. Thousands rose against German oppression. Warriors believed sacred water could protect them from bullets. They faced machine guns. Over 100,000 died, many from starvation as Germans burned villages. After World War I, Britain took control of Tanganyika. British rule was less violent but still relied on forced labor, taxation, and land displacement. By the 1950s, independence movements were rising across Africa. Ghana gained independence. Kenya's Mau Mau shook British power. And in Tanzania, a school teacher turned politician emerged who would lead the fight for independence. His name was Julius Nyerere.
Development to us cannot be the building of a road. Development to us must be the development of our people.
Julius Kambarage Nyerere was born in 1922, the son of a Zanaki chief. He attended Makerere University in Uganda. Then in 1949, became the first Tanzanian to study at a British university when he went to Edinburgh on a government scholarship. There, he shaped his political beliefs, blending socialism with traditional African values. He returned in 1952 with a master's degree in history and economics and worked as a teacher. But politics called. He founded the Tanganyika African National Union and built a mass movement demanding independence. On December 9, 1961, Tanganyika became independent with Nyerere as its first prime minister. In 1962, when Tanganyika became a republic, he was elected president. In 1964, following Zanzibar's revolution, he unified Tanganyika and Zanzibar to form Tanzania. Now came the hard part, building a nation. Julius Nyerere earned the Swahili name Mwalimu, the teacher, and he would spend 24 years teaching Tanzania his vision of African socialism. What made Julius Nyerere truly different? He lived what he preached. While its contemporaries built palace, Nyerere lived in a house so small that even his socialist colleagues were embarrassed. While other leaders' children attended Swiss boarding schools, his children went to regular Tanzanian schools, the same ones every other Tanzanian child attended. One observer who spent time with him said he talked to Prince Charles in the same way he talked to the mama in the village or a child. For him, everybody was important. In 1967, Nyerere issued the Arusha Declaration. His vision was that Tanzania would build socialism not through class struggle, but through traditional African values of community and cooperation. He called it Ujamaa, familyhood in Swahili. The declaration had 3 pillars. First, Tanzania would not depend on foreign aid or Western capitalism. As he said, we must run while others walk. Second, banks, major industries, and companies were nationalized. The state would control the economy for the people's benefit. Third, people would move to live in shared villages with schools, clinics, and joint farmlands where everyone worked together and shared what they produced. And it worked, but only for a while. Walk into any village school in 1975. Every child has a desk, every child has a book. Discipline is strong. Tanzania's literacy rate exploded from 17% in 1960 to 63% by 1975. Infant mortality dropped. Life expectancy rose from 37 years to 52. Primary school enrollment jumped from 25% to 72%. Tanzania became a haven for liberation movement. Nyerere hosted the ANC from South Africa, enforced fighting white minority rule across South Africa. But Nyerere's greatest passion was Pan-Africanism, the liberation of the entire African continent. In 1963, together with Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Nyerere co-founded the Organization of African Unity, the OAU. The OAU would later become the African Union. Tanzania became the headquarters for liberation movements from across Africa. The African National Congress and Pan-Africanist Congress fighting apartheid in South Africa. Frelimo battling Portuguese colonialism in Mozambique. Robert Mugabe's forces opposing white rule in Rhodesia. Tanzania provided them with land, housing, offices, military training camps, and diplomatic support. In 1962, Nelson Mandela secretly traveled to Tanzania and met with Nyerere, seeking support for the ANC's armed struggle. Nyerere provided both moral and material support. Even earlier, in 1959, Nyerere was the main speaker at a meeting in London, launching the international boycott of South African products, one of the first major anti-apartheid actions by the global community. And one by one, the victories came. Zimbabwe gained independence in 1980, Namibia in 1990, and finally, South Africa became a democracy in 1994. When Nelson Mandela visited Tanzania after his release from prison, Tanzanians cried, not for Mandela, but watching Nyerere watch Mandela, because they knew without Nyerere, Mandela might still be in prison. Many historians, they argue that there would be no Mandela as we know him without Nyerere. But while Nyerere was liberating a continent, something else was happening in Tanzania. And this is where the story gets complicated. In 1965, Tanzania officially became a one-party state. All opposition parties were banned. The Tanganyika African National Union, later renamed CCM, became the only legal party. Nyerere argued that multi-party democracy was a luxury Tanzania couldn't afford during nation building. This was the blueprint every president after him would follow. By the late 1970s, Nyerere's reign became more oppressive. The government began forcing people to leave their homes and move to collective villages. Nearly 10 million farmers were moved. Most were forced to give up their land. The government's stated goal was to provide better services, schools, clinics, water, by concentrating the scattered rural population. But when people resisted leaving their ancestral lands, the government used force. Villages were burned. People were moved at gunpoint. To most Tanzanians, the idea of collective farming was wrong. The policy was rejected by a significant fraction of the population. The main foundation of Ujamaa, voluntary cooperation, had failed. Productivity didn't increase. It collapsed to less than 50% of what had been achieved on independent farms. Forced collectivization led to food shortages. Tanzania transformed from Africa's largest food exporter to its largest food importer. The dream was dying. And then another crisis hit. In 1971, Idi Amin seized power in Uganda through a military coup. Nyerere offered safety to Uganda's overthrown president, Milton Obote. Tensions escalated. In late 1978, Idi Amin's forces invaded Tanzania's Kagera region. Nyerere had no choice. Tanzania's army expanded from less than 40,000 troops to over 100,000. In 1979, Kampala fell. Ugandan residents lined the streets, chanting, "Julius Nyerere." Tanzania had defeated one of Africa's most brutal dictators. The Tanzanian army was so proud that they built Nyerere a house as a gift for winning the war. It still stands today in Butiama. But victory came at a devastating cost. The campaign proved very expensive. The war, combined with the global oil crisis, devastated Tanzania's economy. The last 5 years of his rule were very bad for Tanzania. By the 1980s, Tanzania was one of Africa's poorest countries. Per capita income was just $250. 1/3 of Tanzania's national budget came from foreign aid. In 1985, under pressure from the International Monetary Fund and World Bank, Tanzania was forced to abandon socialism. Ujamaa was over. And Julius Nyerere, the first African head of state to retire voluntarily, stepped down. He stepped down because he realized his socialist policies weren't working economically. But he never abandoned his belief in the moral vision behind it. He remained convinced that socialism's goal, dignity for the poor, was right, even if the execution had failed. His successors decided otherwise. After his resignation, Nyerere continued as chairman of CCM until 1990, but never interfered in his successors' policies, even as they reversed many of his own. On October 14, 1999, Julius Nyerere died from leukemia in a London hospital. When the news broke out, there was a massive crying. University students wept for 2 weeks. The entire nation mourned the death of their father. He was buried in his hometown of Butiama, still celebrated as the father of the nation. After Nyerere stepped down in 1985, Ali Hassan Mwinyi became Tanzania's second president. He inherited an economy in crisis. His nickname? Mzee Rukhsa, Mr. Everything Goes. And that nickname tells you everything. Mwinyi was the compromise successor. He pushed economic reforms, transforming Tanzania to an open market economy. In 1986, he resumed negotiations with the World Bank and IMF and secured a $78 million loan. The results were significant. GDP growth went from just 1% in 1980 to 1985 to 3.9% under his rule. He began privatizing industries. He opened markets. And in 1992, under Mwinyi's administration, Tanzania adopted multi-party democracy. For the first time since independence, the door was opened for political competition. But the CCM has remained dominant ever since. And Mwinyi's presidency had a serious problem: corruption. Corruption became so widespread that major donors, including Sweden, which froze $13.5 million in import and debt support, suspended aid in 1994. A World Bank report revealed that the Customs Authority had failed to account for tens of millions of dollars, with lost revenue estimated between $125 to $140 million in 1993 alone. Tanzania needed a clean break. They needed someone untainted by scandal. They needed Benjamin Mkapa. In 1995, Benjamin Mkapa was elected as Tanzania's third president in an anti-corruption campaign. He had strong support from Julius Nyerere, who saw in him the integrity Tanzania needed. Mkapa earned the nickname Mr. Clean, and he delivered economic transformation. GDP growth increased from just 1.57% in 1994 to 7.48% by 2005. Inflation dropped from 37.9% to 4.36%. He privatized state-owned corporations and instituted free market policies. This won him support from the World Bank and IMF, resulting in foreign debt cancellation. Mkapa established key institutions, the Tanzania Revenue Authority, Social Security Schemes, and the Tanzania Commission for AIDS. In 1999, he declared HIV a national disaster and fought it aggressively. He revamped the mining industry. Gold production increased from less than 1 ton per year in 1998 to over 45 tons by 2009. Tanzania was becoming an economic success story, but there was a dark side. In October 2000, Zanzibar held elections. The ruling CCM party claimed victory over the opposition Civic United Front. But the election was unfair because of widespread fraud. The ballot boxes seized, police stations closed, opposition agents beaten and arrested. 3 months later, on January 27, 2001, thousands took to the streets to protest the stolen election. Tanzanian security forces opened fire on opposition protesters in Zanzibar. At least 35 people were killed and over 600 injured. In the following days, security forces went house to house, indiscriminately arresting, beating, and sexually abusing island residents. Some 2,000 Zanzibaris fled to Kenya. President Mkapa publicly congratulated security officers for what he described as an excellent job in restoring order. So here's the question: can you have economic development without democracy? Mkapa fixed the economy brilliantly, but he restricted freedom. That tension would define Tanzania's future. In 2005, Jakaya Kikwete became Tanzania's 4th president. Known simply as JK, he came with impressive credentials: 10 years as foreign minister, chairman of the African Union, peacemaker in the Great Lakes region, particularly in Burundi and the Democratic Republic of Congo. He was a diplomat, a statesman. Economically, he promoted growth to about 7%, though he acknowledged it wasn't adequate for poverty reduction. Many rural Tanzanians still lived in poverty. The benefits of growth were not felt equally, but Kikwete was a champion of health initiatives to fight HIV/AIDS, malaria, and improve immunization programs. However, like his predecessors, he passed authoritarian legislation. He temporarily banned newspapers. And most significantly, in 2015, he cancelled Zanzibari elections when the opposition was winning. Opposition representation in parliament began to shrink. By 2015, Tanzanians were tired of corruption, tired of unfulfilled promises. They wanted action. They wanted someone who would shake things up. They wanted a bulldozer. His name was John Pombe Magufuli, and he was about to change everything. Born in 1959 in Chateau, a quiet district by Lake Victoria, Magufuli grew up knowing poverty. He earned degrees up to a PhD in chemistry. He started as a teacher, then became an industrial chemist before entering politics in 1995. As Minister of Works, he built roads, connected regions, and introduced rapid bus systems in Dar es Salaam. He had something rare in Tanzanian politics: a clean record, free from corruption. He earned the nickname the Bulldozer for getting things done. In the 2015 election, Magufuli campaigned on fighting corruption and creating jobs. He won 58% of the vote. his vice president, Samia Suluhu Hassan, and Magufuli wasted no time showing the country what kind of leader he would be. November 6, 2015. Just days after his inauguration, President Magufuli walked into the Ministry of Finance unannounced, checking empty offices and asking uncomfortable questions. Magufuli had inherited a system full of corruption, ghost workers on the payroll, absentee civil servants, underperforming officials. He fired hospital directors who weren't working. He dropped in on government offices without warning. He cut down on wasteful spending. Independence Day celebrations were cancelled for the first time in 54 years, replacing by a nationwide cleanup campaign. Magufuli himself swept streets outside the State House. He cut his presidential salary from $15,000 to $4,000 monthly. He eliminated ghost workers from the payroll. He renegotiated mining contracts with foreign companies. He pushed big projects, a standard railway, expanded highways, the rapid transit system. Electricity production increased, reducing blackouts. He revived Air Tanzania. Magufuli upheld a policy banning pregnant schoolgirls from returning to class, even after giving birth. In 2018, he amended the law so government statistics couldn't be challenged. Question them, and it became a crime. Barely 2 months into his term, State TV stopped broadcasting live parliamentary sections. The opposition tried to protest. The government banned all demonstrations. Then came the 2020 election. Magufuli won his second term with 84% of the vote. But the main opposition rejected the result as fraudulent. International observers raised alarms about intimidation and internet shutdown. Look at what happened to opposition representation in parliament. 2015, opposition won 75 of 264 seats. 2020, opposition won just 20 constituency seats, including only one from the main opposition Chadema party. So Magufuli's rule became getting things done, but also don't cross me. Then came COVID-19. In early 2020, the world faced a global pandemic, COVID-19. Countries locked down, economies froze. But in Tanzania, something strange happened. Despite holding a PhD in chemistry, President John Magufuli dismissed the coronavirus. He claimed it couldn't survive in the body of Jesus. By May 2020, Magufuli declared the virus defeated through national prayer. Tanzania stopped releasing infection numbers in April 2020. Schools and restaurants stayed open. He opposed vaccinations, saying if white people were able to come up with vaccinations, a vaccination for AIDS would have been found. He encouraged people to inhale steam and use herbal remedies. While the president denied COVID existed, people died, but the official line never changed. In early 2021, Magufuli went weeks without being seen in public. Rumors started spreading after news came that an African leader was hospitalized in Nairobi, Kenya. On March 17, 2021, Vice President Samia Suluhu Hassan announced on national television that President John Magufuli had died at Mzee Memorial Hospital. She cited chronic heart issues as the cause. On March 19, 2021, Samia Suluhu Hassan was sworn in as Tanzania's 6th president, completing the remainder of Magufuli's second term. She became Tanzania's first female president. Her rise was historic. Would she bring back democracy? Born in Zanzibar in 1960, Samia came from modest beginnings. Her father was a school teacher. Her mother was a housewife. She has admitted publicly that her secondary school results were poor. At 17, she took a job as a government clerk. At the age of 18, she married Hafid Amer, an agriculturalist. Together, they would have 4 children. But Samia was ambitious. While working full-time and raising children, she studied part-time. She earned diplomas. She traveled to Britain for further education. She worked her way up from clerk to development officer to project manager at the World Food Programme. In 2000, at age 40, she entered politics. She became a minister in Zanzibar's government, the only high-ranking woman in a cabinet of men who didn't take her seriously. But she proved them wrong. She fought to allow pregnant girls and new mothers to return to school, a bold, progressive move in conservative Zanzibar. By 2015, she was John Magufuli's running mate, Tanzania's first female vice president. Known as Mama Samia, she was soft-spoken, collaborative, diplomatic, everything Magufuli was not. And for 5.5 years, she stood quietly beside the bulldozer. Now, she was in charge. She gave Tanzanians reason to hope. Samia announced her agenda, the 4 Rs: reconciliation, resilience, reforms, and rebuilding. And she started strong. Within months, she ended Magufuli's COVID denial. She acknowledged the virus. She joined COVAX. In July 2021, she launched a vaccine drive. By December 2021, she set up a task force on political reform with reconsideration to allow political rallies again, create an independent electoral body, and pursue constitutional reforms. She released some political prisoners. She reached out to opposition leaders. The economic GDP grew from $69.7 billion in 2021 to $85.42 billion in 2023. Tanzanians were hopeful. Maybe she was different. Maybe the country's first female president could bring the change it needed. But slowly, quietly, things began to change. You see, by late 2023, the reform momentum was slowing. Reports emerged of adoptions and disappearances of government critics, arrest of opposition figures, increased police brutality. What happened? Inside the ruling party, CCM, there was a battle. A Magufulist faction resisted Samia's reforms, seeing them as weakness. And Samia made a choice. The question historians will debate will be that, was Samia always authoritarian, or did the system change her? But either way, by 2024, the brief opening was closing. The reforms were slowing down. And then came the announcement. Elections would be held in October 2025. In the months leading up to the election, opposition activity grew rapidly. Chadema gained momentum. Their rallies drew thousands of people. On April 9, 2025, Tundu Lissu was arrested after a political rally in Mbinga. The charge? Treason, for calling for electoral reforms. Treason in Tanzania carries a potential death sentence, and people charged with this offense are not eligible for bail. On April 12, 2025, Chadema was disqualified from the elections after party officials refused to sign the Electoral Code of Conduct. The party had said it would not sign until the government undertook electoral reforms. Luhaga Mpina, the second largest opposition candidate, was also barred from running. By election day, the main opposition was banned. Their leaders was imprisoned. The election had no real competition. As Tanzanians went to the polls, the internet went dark nationwide. Social media was blocked. All communication was cut off. Military forces were deployed to the streets. When results was announced, everyone was left speechless. Samia Suluhu Hassan won 97.66% of the vote. The commission claimed 31.9 million votes were cast, representing 82% turnout, far higher than the 12.5 million votes cast in the 2020 election. The African Union and SADC election observers issued damning parliamentary statements questioning the credibility of the result. What happened after the election is so difficult to verify, to be honest. Due to the internet shutdown and government media restrictions, the opposition Chadema party collected reports of up to 1,000 people killed by police and security forces in 8 of Tanzania's 31 regions. Reports emerged that among the dead were Kenyans, including one identified as John Okoth Ogutu, allegedly shot on election day. Tanzania's foreign minister denied the opposition's figures, saying the government had no official figures on protesters killed. Court documents show at least 76 to 145 people were charged with treason for alleged involvement in protest. Later reports indicated more than 200 people were charged with treason. In first public statement after being sworn in, President Samia Hassan blamed foreigners for the violence, claiming it was not a surprise that those arrested were from other countries. On November 3, 2025, Samia Hassan was sworn in for a second term at a ceremony closed to the public. Unlike previous inaugurations, regional bodies are calling for dialogue, but the government shows no signs of backing down. Tundu Lissu remains in custody, with his treason trial repeatedly postponed. Chadema remains banned from political activities, and Tanzanians are demanding answers. How did we get here? Now, to answer that question, we need to look at two fundamental causes. The ruling party, CCM, Chama cha Mapinduzi, has held power since independence. 64 years, same party, same structures, same networks of loyalty and control. When you've had power for 64 years, the idea of losing becomes unthinkable. And when losing becomes unthinkable, you'll do anything to prevent it, even if it means banning opposition parties, imprisoning rivals, and claiming 97% of the vote. Then, Tanzania's democratic institutions were built under one-party rule. When multi-party democracy came in 1992, the structures didn't fundamentally change. The Electoral Commission is appointed by the president, not truly independent. The judiciary faces pressure. Parliament, with opposition reduced from 75 seats in 2015 to 20 in 2020, to being completely banned in 2025, provides no meaningful check on executive power. Without independent institutions, democracy is just a word, but perhaps Julius Nyerere himself planted the seeds. He used these tools with pure intentions. His successors did not. They inherited the one-party system, the power to silence opposition, the pattern of forcing people for their own good. But they used those tools for power and control, not unity. So that's how Tanzania went from Nyerere's dream to Samia's nightmare, a founding father who built a one-party state with pure intentions, successors who inherited his blueprint but used it for power, and finally, a system so set in place that even Tanzania's first female president couldn't or wouldn't break free from it. The final blow to what remained of Tanzania's democratic hopes. The question now is, can Tanzania find a way forward? Can a new generation reclaim what Nyerere promised in 1961? Unity without oppression and development without dictatorship. Only time will tell. This video is dedicated to all Tanzanians fighting for democracy, freedom, and the vision the founding father promised in 1961. Thank you for staying with me till the end of this video. I truly appreciate your support, your comment, and every one of you who subscribe to this channel. Together, we can shine a light on the stories that need to be told across our continent. Okay, I'll stop rambling now. I hope to see you in the next one. Please, stay safe. Bye.